a question. My question is, why are we here? Why are we here? Is it beautiful, Deal? It's stunning. 2 castles, I went for a run on the shore, I didn't want to stop. It was just, what a beautiful, beautiful town this is. Is it the opportunity to talk to you, our tribe? You know, to get ideas, to get inspiration, to test some things out. Is that why we're here? Are we here for each other to push our knowledge and push our thinking? Or are we here for Rory? Brilliant, funny, inspirational Rory. I think it's all of those reasons, but it's also because I think that we are, in some ways, revolutionaries in our thinking, that we are guilty of corporate sedition for those of you who work in organizations that have a certain way of thinking, and that this method, this way of thinking, this process of thinking, is actually a kind of democracy. And it was so wonderful hearing you talk earlier about issues of political philosophy and political economics and how some of these very discrete applications ought to be grounded in a broader strategic framework, in a theoretical framework. And I would say that looking at our work in terms of democracy and the democratization of ideas and the transparency of their efficacy and failure and limits is part of the power of, I think, this journey that we're on. So why? Why are we here? It's because the tools that we have to understand each other, people, they're just not good enough. We know that focus groups, while an interesting way to tap into the voice of the customer, it's actually incredibly biased by self-presentation. People will say all kinds of things in these artificial constructs. The ASH experiments are a phenomenal way to see that in effect. Customer satisfaction metrics, they don't actually really tell us what customers value. We have that whole say-do gap that prohibits us from really getting into actionable insights. Case studies, well, they've got bias too. We've got selection bias and survivorship bias. That's the challenge with case studies, is we don't know what the actual factors were that contributed to that success or failure, because we don't have a control for the potential confounds. So case studies give us very limited insights, or at least we need to recognize the potential bias when we are looking at case studies. And big data. Big data, it's kind of where I really feel, on the thinnest ice when I want to poke at big data, because it's so sexy. But Dan likes to say it's sort of like teenage sex, where everybody is talking about it, but nobody is actually doing it. And I think some other challenges were raised by some of our other members of the group today, and that was things like the insights are either based on past behavior, which doesn't take into consideration the manipulation of the present state, will lead to a fundamentally different choice. So if you look at what I did yesterday versus how I might act with a new choice architecture in front of me, we're just basing on old information. And we also know that correlation doesn't equal causation. It's like thrilling that that's actually a meme on the internet now. So why are we here? Why are we here? Because I know that all of you, like me, have this outrageous, unrelenting passion and quest for knowledge on what it is that informs and influences how we think, whether it's at the biological level or whether it's at the surface level and cues and triggers in the environmental context. We have this same burning desire to understand how and when we're predictably irrational. Psychology concepts, like self-concept maintenance. This idea of myself as a healthy, vegetarian runner doesn't take into consideration the voracious appetite I have for cookies and candy. We work very hard to maintain this concept of ourselves. That's not necessarily something that you would see within rational theory, and yet it became a profound and necessary insight to help us develop a strategy for an insurance company. A very, very simple nudge was to have people, instead of signing the policy form at the end, we had them sign the form at the top. So my co-founder at BE Works, the professor Nina Mazar, undertook a study with over 13,000 auto insurance policies and tested this simple nudge on the premise that if you sign at the bottom, you've already sort of committed this little sin. So what's this little sin? So the sinners and saints in the room, this doesn't apply to you, but for the rest of us, when you're asked to declare how many miles you drive your car, I can bet that most of you probably round down as opposed to rounding up how many miles you drive, and it affects your policy rate just a little bit. So when Nina had folks sign this form at the top in this randomized control trial, what did we learn? We learned that people had miraculously 10% more miles that they actually drove. So what is this? The self-concept is that if we sign at the end, we've already sort of committed the little error of omission, the little error of rounding down. But if we just sign at the top, the idea of 10 commandments and the influence of actually just having 10 commandments right in front of you primes you for that moment to be a little bit more honest. So this is taking psychology concepts, something like self-concept maintenance, and actually applying that to a business strategy and then seeing the effect of that nudge in a randomized control experiment. Why are we here? We're here because we believe that context matters. We've all seen this. We know that it's a B here, that it looks like a 13 here, but it's the context that is influencing it. We've seen Dan's work on the economist experiment that demonstrates this amazing preference reversal that impacts how people actually choose. So we took some of these theories on context and ran a study understanding what the potential impact is to how people declare what their risk appetite is. Many regulators require investors to articulate what their risk appetite is, whether they're risk averse or want a more aggressive portfolio before they're able to execute a trade. So if you want to purchase any instrument, you're handed this form, you're asked to select one. So our hypothesis was that this form was actually vulnerable to framing effects. So this is the form that consumers typically see, and the graphics actually conform to that, but for the purpose of this, I'll show you more of an illustration of what we did. So we use the decoy effect. All the other information has been stripped away for you. So instead of people actually making a determination of what their risk is based on the calculated values, we did a series of tests using a decoy, which is we'll call that A-, and a decoy we'll call D+. Very simple construct. We removed D, we introduced a lower risk decoy, and we saw how significantly the distribution shifted to lower risk portfolios. So you would think, okay, so people want more low-risk portfolio options. So we tried the other way. We removed the low-risk option and we introduced an ultra-high-risk portfolio. And what did we see? We saw a significant number of people swayed over to ultra-high and high-risk portfolios, reaching a majority now choosing the high risk. So what is the lesson in that? Well, first of all, context matters. Framing effects influence the choices that we make. But the much more significant takeaway for international regulators and security regulators and policymakers and business leaders is that we don't actually know what the effect of things would be necessarily unless we test. If we test, we're able to see what the potential unintended consequences are of our design choices. So sadly, we believe that often people are choosing their model portfolio in the same way that they order coffee. They just say a medium. They don't calibrate how many ounces that coffee actually is. They're just conditioned more or less to pick something near the middle. So why are we here? We're here because small nudges can make a big difference. We did a project with 1 million cardholders who were in arrears with the credit card company that had been trying a number of techniques with third-party collections agencies. And this particular company is both a store and the credit card company. And as they went to pursue the individuals who were behind on their debt, they were jeopardizing the very relationships with the shoppers of the store. So it was a very difficult conundrum. They could be very aggressive in getting the funds back from their credit card users, but at the risk of losing a lifetime shopper. So what tactics could they try? And they decided to turn to behavioral economics, where we have potentially much subtler nudges to reach and influence consumers. So in fact, one of the first things that we did was we changed in an outbound IVR call, an automated call, we changed the script. So instead of saying this is an important call, we changed it to this is an urgent call. We had 9% more people stay on the call just by that simple word change. So for those of you who have a passion for words, they actually do have a significant impact, and we have the data to demonstrate that. So we tested a number of other conditions, again, seemingly incredibly simple. One of the conditions that we tested was having people select when they'll make their payment, deconstructed down into specific hours. We had the voice of the CEO in one case, the COO, in one case identified as him in the message, saying, hi, my name is Kelly, and I just want to thank you for being a customer, but also thank you for your commitment to repaying your debt. And in another case, just without the use of that title, and let's see what effect that had. And then lastly, having the customer make their pledge back by pressing a button that they're going to follow through on that commitment. Seemingly subtle nudges, but what's incredible is we were able to see a lift across a number of measures, whether they made a payment, whether they actually cured the average dollar payment that they made, and the ratio of the payment to the outstanding balance. All of those went up. They all went up subtly. None of them went up dramatically, but the effect of a small degree of change over a very large base is a great demonstration of the significance that subtle changes can have. Now that we have an experimental construct, we can continue to test new ideas within this infrastructure, refine and tweak. We have a new champion-challenger model. Every time we have an idea, we can test and employ that in that environment. So small nudges and small lifts can make a huge difference to the bottom line. Why are we here? We're here because we believe that details matter, and I'll do a different version of a Steve Jobs homage, which is that when he saw the first Apple II, there were visible screw heads on it, and apparently he had one of his alleged, tirades about the visible screws. He wanted it to be pristine and that design mattered. And I think that this is an incredibly powerful metaphor for us because CEOs, CMOs, the strategists, the thinkers, we design these grand schemes, but then often these strategies are handed over to people who don't have either the knowledge of things like cognitive and social psychology and the integration of design thinking into the actual design, and they don't have the skills like empirical testing and randomized control testing to actually be able to ensure that the products and services that we're launching don't have visible screw heads all over them. But I don't know about you guys, but everywhere I look, all of these processes, when I call, every interaction it seems that I have ends up this painful, frustrating experience. There are visible screw heads all over when we can modify and improve these experiences. So why are we here? I think we're here because scientists don't need to be business leaders, but business leaders ought to be scientific. They ought to be scientific because being scientific will let us overthrow the opinions of the most highly paid person in the room because we have an infrastructure that lets us test and control. It doesn't matter if you're an intern, whether you're new to an organization, whether you're an outsider. In an empirical infrastructure, these ideas have the opportunity to be tested on their own merit. It doesn't matter if you're someone who's been in the organization for many, many years and holding on to prior beliefs and traditions. You're able to actually test and control and move beyond old ways of thinking and prior beliefs. And why are we here? Because the scientific method and all of the domain knowledge that we have through psychology lets us take risk. We can do small-scale tests to unleash innovation and empower our creative ideas based on a fundamental understanding of how people think and make decisions. Thank you very much.